I'm going to show you how to use Primordial Software's property rental management application. The first thing you're going to want to do is go to primordial-software.com and then create an account. I have another video showing how to create an account and log in, so I'm not going to go through that process. Once you log in, you'll know if you have access to the property rental management application if you see the Receipts tab. If you do not see the Receipts tab, then you need to request access. Once you click the Receipts tab, you'll go into the property rental management application. You may not see all these navigation links. Reports is meant for managers and business owners, because in there you'll see all of the income, which you may not want to show to every individual person that logs in. The first thing that you have in the top is your vendors. Now, vendors, this is in the context of flea market, so your vendors are going to be your customers in QuickBooks. So in QuickBooks, I have a test company. The display name is TG Test Company, and I have a first and last name of Timothy Gonzalez. You will see both the display name and first and last name in your vendor search. Once I select the company, if this is a person I've done business with in the past, you might see prior balance and a payment frequency. But for right now, I'm going to treat this as a brand new customer or vendor that I'm selling to. So their balance is going to be 0 and they're going to have no existing payment frequency. From here, you can select spots that you want to reserve. The reservations are for 1 day. If you need to do multiple days of reservations, you right now need to do multiple different receipts, unless if, I'll go into it later, you want to set them up as a weekly or monthly vendor, and then they'll have that spot reserved indefinitely until you cancel that status. But for right now, I'm just going to say that I want to rent it for 1 day. I'll enter the spot that I want to reserve, and if I don't know which spots are available, I can go to the map. So on the map, you have all of the property. This one has maybe 300 or more spots. In gray are the reserved areas that cannot be rented out, and red are the areas that are already rented out, and then in green are the available areas. All of this goes by week, and you can look at which week you were looking at the reservations for and the rental date. All rentals are on a Sunday. Usually flea markets have 1 day that they do the majority of their business. That marks the beginning and end of their cycle. And for Lakeland Mi Pueblo, the primary day of business is Sunday. So rental dates will default to the first upcoming Sunday, and then going forward you can look at the next Sunday's reservation. For weekly or monthly vendors, their reservation will always be in red, regardless of how far into the future you go. For the receipt I'm doing, where I'm adding a spot as a one-time spot, those are only for 1 day, and then I'll show how it works after I do it. When you go into the future, past the day of the rental, the spot will be open. So I'll use number 29 in field S as the reservation I'm going to do for this test. Now the red field is the invoice amount. In here it's the rental amount, but it's always the amount that you're going to charge as a new charge in addition to whatever may be there. So for right now, it's going to be a new rental, and let's just say I want to do it for $20 for that spot. I want to do it for the upcoming Sunday. It's going to be the 8th. Rental date must be, right now it can only be one day of the week to simplify the reservation process. That avoids, when you go to rental date, having to do complex ranges. So by just doing one day, it significantly reduces the complexity that you see in the map. So that most of the time when you go to the map, it's always automatically up to date for the upcoming week's rentals. So $20 is what I'm going to charge them new, and I'm going to create an invoice for that. And then if I were taking payment right now, I would also put $20 as well. So that's going to create an invoice for $20, then create a payment for $20. You do have the ability to take a credit card payment. This will use Clover's APIs, and you can enter the card number, all the credit card information. This is PCI compliant, and that none of the information is stored, and the only thing that the application ever has any type of handle on is the token to charge the card, which once that's done, it's disposed of. It's recommended to use an actual Clover device to swipe the card, primarily because the fees are going to be lower. And I'm not going to do card payment right now. Let's say this is cash or check payment, and then I can write a note of what this is. So I'll just say Tim payment for field spot S 29. Now down here you'll see vendor notes. These are unique notes that you can save within the Primordial software application, and what these notes are going to be is notes that are private to the users of this application, that might say any additional details about their spot or the vendor. And once everything's entered, we can do save and print. That's going to save the information. The software will create a record in its own database of the sale information. Then there will be another record. So the transaction ID is the record that the software creates on its own for every sale that's performed. Then the other records you have are going to be in QuickBooks for the invoice and payment. Now, I'll get into how the payments work exactly, but here we can see that the $20 payment was applied to the invoice dated 2021-8/8. That's going to be important for when we have a customer that's going to have some history and maybe making partial payments or be behind on payments. We can see exactly what that payment goes to, in case if there is a misunderstanding with what that payment was, especially when you may be late. And then one other thing is this receipt number is going to correspond to the invoice and payment in QuickBooks. So you have I40311, that means it created invoice 40311, and P40312, so you have payment ID 40312. So if you ever get somebody's receipt, you can go back and always link that to what happened in QuickBooks. So you potentially could never just go and create a receipt on your own, because if you did, it wouldn't match up to the record identities in QuickBooks or in the Primordial software application. And finally, it does a timestamp, and then you have who it was by that's currently logged in. Now, what I recommend is you put the application on a phone and then buy a Bluetooth printer for that phone, and then you can do all of your business mobily wherever you are, and you're not tied to an office. So once that's done, let's say if you just want to quickly take more payments, you would just go to new receipt, and now you're ready for your next customer. So now I'm going to go and show you what it would be like for a repeating customer where they have an indefinite reservation and they're paying monthly. But just before I do, let me show you what gets created in QuickBooks Online. So we have an invoice for the amount that was in red, and then we have a payment for the amount that was in green. So in our notes, it's going to go there, and if we go to print preview to print invoice from here, those notes are going to say private. Now, the way this business is set up right now is to do amounts after tax. So all amounts paid include tax. So the amount that you enter here for the payment amount or the rental amount get reduced by the amount of tax. Well, only for the rental amounts. So 18.7265 is 6.8 sales tax, which brings a total to $20. And then the product is just rent. Now we can see that the payment is automatically applied. On the payment, we have in the note the actual date that the payment was made. The way QuickBooks reports work is everything doesn't look correct in the report if you put the payment date as the actual payment date. It's going to make it look like there are unapplied payments when someone is prepaying when you run your reports. So the payment date is going to be the invoice date, and then the actual day the payment was made is going to go in a note as the true payment date. In addition to that, you're going to have the payment entered by name based on the current user logged in, and we also have their IP address. And below that we have the note that was entered in the memo field, and then an additional auto-generated note for the spots that were reserved. Now if we reload the map, we'll see that the spot is now reserved for 8/8, and if I go and look at the next date, it's currently available because that was only a one-time rental. Now if I try and do a day that's not a Sunday, you got an error, rental date must be a Sunday. Now if I go into that vendor, I will see their one-time reservations. If for some reason I made a mistake, I can cancel the reservation, but right now I'm going to keep it and show you what would happen if I now try to reuse that to make sure that it is in fact reserved. So we can see now we can no longer rent on that day because I've already reserved it. Now let's say I want to rent again for the next Sunday, for the next 2 weeks out. There's no issue because I have not yet made the payment to reserve that spot. So now I'm going to go through the process. That was the process of someone renting a spot per day. Now I'm going to go through the process of someone that might be renting that spot out indefinitely, and they may either be paying weekly or monthly. So I'm just going to cancel my reservations so I can keep showing how to use that same spot. And verify it's clear. So now your vendors is automatically going to show everybody that's a customer, that's an active customer in QuickBooks Online. So now let's say I want to rent field S29 again, and I want to pay for that spot. Let's say I want to pay $100 for that spot. I'll pay that each month, and I will have that reserved indefinitely for an indefinite month-to-month lease, essentially. Okay, got disconnected from the network. And that's why you should do this on a phone with cellular service where you're not going to get disconnected. So I'm now saved. Yeah. So the first thing let's do is look at the map and verify that I have that spot reserved indefinitely. So you can see it's there. And this time, unlike the one-time spots, I can go any amount in the future. As long as it's a Sunday. And I have that spot reserved. So right now I've essentially set up an indefinite month-to-month lease. Now there is a process that automatically occurs every week for weekly vendors and every month for monthly vendors. The process goes, pulls all your active vendors and creates an invoice for them for the upcoming month, so that on the first of the month all the invoices are created and you're ready to start taking payments with balances. And you can see all your balance. You can see all your balances due for all your customers for that month, and you can see every customer's individual balance. I'm going to create the invoice now manually because it's already after the first of the month and that process isn't going to run. And while I do that, I'll go over the invoice creation process. So the way the invoice creation process works is if you already have an invoice for that month, when you're doing monthly vendors, it will skip over you regardless of the invoice amount and assume that you've properly created an invoice for that month. And the reason it does that is because of prepayments. So you can do prepayments two different ways. The way I prefer prepayments to be done is only by entering a payment. If you only enter a payment when the automatic invoice creation process runs, it'll see that there is no invoice for that month. It will create an invoice for that month, and then it will look for unapplied payments and attempt to pay the invoice until it's paid off. If you do it that way, I can pay a year in advance, and every month the amount of credit I have on that account from prepayments will slowly be deducted. And what that's going to do is allow you to pay sales taxes on the minimum amount and delay it throughout all of the time that you've prepaid. So let's say I were to be renting monthly and I want to prepay for the next 6 months. So the first issue is if I just create one invoice of $600 and one payment of $600, when it goes to throughout the months past that first month, it's going to see that there is no invoice. Create an invoice for your monthly amount and then start creating the payments due. You could potentially do higher payment frequencies, but it's still not going to get around the problem of sales tax. By always relying on the system to create the invoices, you're going to make sure that your sales tax is postponed as much as possible and that when you create an invoice, it's always going to be for what's actually a sale that's actually occurring. You're not invoicing for something that hasn't occurred yet. Now also, if you wanted to, you could do the invoice amount and the payment amount, but it's really always safer to just do the payment amount when you see that someone is monthly, and that'll automatically create invoices and apply the payments effectively as a sale occurs, which is each month. So now for here, I'm going to go into the application. We'll say last month I signed up to be monthly. It's the beginning of the month. The system automatically created my invoice. There were no payments made yet. So now when I load it, I'm going to have the balance due this month for the $100. You can automatically see that these are the spots I'm paying for. Rental amount isn't needed because I already have my balance. But let's say it's the 8th, rent was due on the 1st, 8 days late, so now I want to charge $25 late fee. So I'll rental amount due $25, and then I'm going to pay the whole $125 due today. And then in a note, I'll write what it was since it wasn't a simple payment. Now I also get to see my payment history, and this just lets you verify quickly what you're seeing and that balance in case if something doesn't look correct. So generally what you may want to do if you're unfamiliar with this customer or vendor is look back at their payment history and see if nothing's changed with them, that they have the same invoice as last time, and if they have made partial payments, that it appears and there are no duplicate invoices or any issues. Okay, so now what this will do is create an invoice for $25 for the late fee. Then it'll take the $125 payment, apply it to the initial invoice for my rent, and then with the $25 remaining, it'll go and look for the next unpaid invoice, and it does this from oldest to newest. So if I were late, the payment would be applied to, let's say I'm a month late and it were and I'm paying now and I'm still not caught up. If my balance were, let's say, 200, it would not apply it to August, it would apply it to July. So now I save it. That'll create the invoice and the two payments. And this is really helpful now under payment details, where you can see it's broken down into two payments. You can see that you have a $100 payment for the invoice of 8/8 for rent, and then you have a $25 payment for 8/8. And I'll actually show why that's most useful for late payments once we look at the information in QuickBooks to verify it got created as we expected. So here we can see the invoice for $100 for rent, then another invoice for the $25 late fee. The payment was entered as $125, but it automatically got broken down based on the invoices. So we have a $100 payment for the $100 invoice, $25 payment for the $25 invoice. And if I had overpaid, I would also have another payment as unapplied. So now let's do a new receipt, and I'll show what it looks like when someone is behind and they make a payment. Just let me delete all of this. And while I'm doing this, I'll mention there is no process right now to void a sale, and I would not recommend everyone having access to QuickBooks Online. For one, by using an API account, you can reduce your licenses that you have to pay on QuickBooks Online, so you can have the smallest version of QuickBooks Online and have any number of people use it through the Primordial software application. And also the permissions in QuickBooks Online are not granular, so I can't prevent people from removing payments. And it's generally good to have a separation between people taking payments and the people being able to remove payments, because QuickBooks is going to be your source of truth, and you don't want everyone that's necessarily going in and taking payments, doing the day-to-day operations, being able to go and potentially remove somebody's payment and make it look like they did not pay, or add a payment without the proper records. Okay, so now I'm going to create an invoice, and I'm going to say this invoice was for last month. It was for July. And now, since it's August 8th, I would have two invoices if I were paying monthly. So I'll create the second invoice. And then I'll just say I'm paying $20 a month for that spot. So in this scenario, I'm a monthly vendor. I paid $20 a month. I'm behind. I'm really behind two payments. One for July, and then I'm also behind now one for August. With it being, let's say it's August 8th today. So now when I load the page and see them, I can see that I pay each month, and my prior balance is $40, so I owe $40. Now since it's 2 payments, I can see it broken down here. Actually, let me fix this. So what I want is 1 invoice for July and 1 invoice for August. Okay, so I can see my balance is $40. I have an invoice for July that was not paid, and I also have an invoice for August that wasn't paid, both for $20. So I currently owe $40. But let's say I'm just not going to be able to catch up yet. I'm going to pay for 1 month $20. And that's all I'm going to do right now. So what it's going to do in this case is look for my oldest invoice, which is in July, apply the payment to that invoice, and then if there's anything remaining, it'll apply it to the August invoice. So let's say I'm actually going to pay $30. I'll pay a partial payment to start to catch up. Print. And then on the receipt, it's going to show a breakdown of how those payments were applied, so your customer can see exactly how it's being applied every time in case if they have a question and they didn't realize they were late. If they look at their receipt, or you can show them their receipt and show in their receipt history that every time they've paid, it's actually been for the last month if maybe you're always behind. So I can see your $20 went to the oldest invoice, dated July, and then the $10 extra went to this month. My prior balance was $40, I paid $30, my new balance is $10. And also one thing to note here on the receipt number, you see there is no I anymore because we didn't create an invoice, and we have 2 P records, so if for any reason you can always say this was the payment and this was the payment to trace it for any reason. And this definitely should not get deleted, and at some point we will add the ability to void it so that we always have that audit trail. But for right now, the majority of the time, that will always tell you with certainty how to track down the payment, unless somebody went and deleted it. Now the first thing let's do is show that these balances are going to be in real time. So the moment somebody pays, everybody who's using this application can see that the payment has been made. Now my balance is $10. See, I paid $20. Everything is automatically up to date. Now when I go to QuickBooks, we can see exactly how the payments were applied. So we have our August invoice. And as we can see, July invoice is paid, August invoice at a partial payment, and so actually payment date can be the actual payment date. The only time that's not the case is when the payment date is prior to the invoice date. That's when you start to have problems with your, really I think it's all of the reports, but definitely your accrual report if you're running. It's really all the reports. I wasn't able to get it to work it's always showing as unapplied. And really the best way to fix it is to put payment date as either the invoice date or in the future, and then just put the true payment date in a note, and that way your reports are always going to be clean. And I think the way it's doing that is to reinforce you to not apply payment to an invoice before that sale has occurred. And that's why it's usually always best to let the system create invoices automatically and apply the payments on the first of the month or the first week, so that everything just looks a little bit cleaner. So now I'll show what an overpayment looks like. So now, let's say it's the end of the day, I made enough money to catch up, and I'm going to pay the $10 I owe and another $20 for next month, so I have a credit. So we can see the prior balance is 10, I'm paying 30, I now have a credit of $20, and $10 was applied to the invoice in August, and $20 was not applied to an invoice, meaning it's available as a credit. Let's see what that looks like in QuickBooks. So I can see my balance, -20. I have a $20 credit. So I broke the payment down into $10 for the remaining balance due on the invoice. So if I go to my August invoice, I can see it has two payments of 10 and 10. And then I have my $20 credit for the payment not applied to an invoice. Now let's say it's September. So let's say it's September 1st, and automatically the system is going to generate the invoice. We can do it here, and it'll work the same exact way. And we can see how the partial payments get applied. So rental date must always be a Sunday. And that's really only for the spot reservations. That's not absolutely needed for the invoices, but it's just done out of simplicity. This is my prior balance. I had a credit off 20. Rental amount was 20. I didn't make a payment, but I don't have a balance. Well, the payment was applied. We didn't do one here, so it's not gonna show anything, because normally this would just be done by the system, and you're not seeing any of this. But now we can reload it, verify my balance is $0. Okay, so this doesn't quite work the way that the automatic process works. For the automatic process that runs in the background, we have a little bit more time. For this process, it has to be quick because you're doing it in front of the person. You may have a line, so it doesn't go into all the complexity. For the automatic process, we will go back every time we have an invoice and attempt to apply that to so when we do the invoice generation, after the invoice generation is done, we automatically go back and attempt to apply any payments to it. We did not apply a payment here because a payment isn't being made, and it's too time consuming to do that real time on the fly. But now if this were the automatic process, it would look for the unapplied payments and attempt to apply them to the invoice. So the automatic process that occurs every week and month would also do this step here. Why did it say an error? So let's clean all of this up, and then we'll go through the prepayment again. And after this, I'll actually run the No, I don't want to run the invoice generation process, but I'll do another video that shows the invoice generation process. Actually, I can do it. Actually, no, I'm not going to do it because, well, no, we can do it. The reason I say I don't want to do it is because near the beginning and end of the month, it gets a little bit confusing of where the time frame it's going to do it. But the invoice generation will show us the time frame. So the automatic invoice generation actually runs a couple of days before the end of the month, so that normally people pay a couple of days on time. I mean, a couple of days early, and so you can see their balances before. I'm uncertain of exactly how many days beforehand the process runs. And so if I were to run it, not from the UI, it might be a little confusing, but I'll do it here. Okay, so now we have a clean customer. Now let's say so let's say they've prepaid $10. So let's say today they're prepaying $10. And there is no invoice yet to apply it to. So when I look up the customer, I can see they automatically have the $10 credit. And it really doesn't make sense in this scenario, but let's make it look a little bit more correct. Actually, like that, that's fine. So then let's say the system is automatically going to go and create the invoice for $20 as though we are now in September and the automatic process is running. Okay, so we can see that the payment has not applied, but it does reflect in the balance. So unless if you're going into QuickBooks, it usually doesn't look like a problem. Now, potentially might be something to fix, because you can see here I've paid $0 of the $20 to the invoice. So here it says I owe $20, but here it says I owe $10. The balance is taking all invoiced amounts and all payments, but now this works at the invoice level, so the payment hasn't been applied to the invoice, so the existing payment has not been applied to the invoice when done from the screen. Now usually that's never a problem, because the automatic process will take it one step further and look for all unapplied payments and apply them to the new invoice, which is what's going to be done here. And let's say again this was on the, let's say this ran on September 1st. So the payment date would be September 1st. So now this is what you would end up seeing if you let the invoice get created every month. Now there's really no reason to ever create an invoice with no payment for a vendor that's monthly, where the invoice will be created for them, and by the time you go and look at them, everything will be correct. So that's why I've never gotten into that long process of looking at all their past payments, because really what you have to do is pull back their entire history. It could be lengthy. If they're paying weekly, you could have 50 invoices, any number of payments, and as you see, this screen is doing everything in QuickBooks on the fly, keeping everything up to date, doing spot reservations, searches, and it's only a matter of seconds. So I couldn't jeopardize the performance for minor discrepancies like unapplied payments. So the thing to note is always go by this prior balance. This little invoice screen is just to help you to help identify what you already see to be an issue. It's not going to point out issues for you. So now the last thing I want to go over on the screen is how you're generally going to use it. Now that I've gone through all the functionality, normally this is what you're going to do. You're going to type in the person's name, look for the name or the company, if they've been here before, check the payment frequency. If it's monthly or weekly, you know that their invoices already get updated. If you see their balance is 0 and you have payment frequency of weekly or monthly, you know they're all paid up to date. And you also know not to charge them unless if there's something additional that they are purchasing that's not done every month. And also you would know, let's say I do someone brand new, if it's a new person, I can see I don't have them as a weekly or monthly vendor. There's no prior history or arrangement. I have no balance, so they should be charged something. If not, I need to look them up and find them. But that person has not yet paid, which is important if you want to know who has paid and has not paid for like access issues, whether to let people in or not, and whether to charge them there to make sure that they are not entering without paying. So then the other thing is, also you do know, let's say there was a balance here and they are, you can see that you already have a relationship with them, and if they don't pay today, then it's not as big of a deal, or that they have a past due balance. So you always want to look at the payment frequency to know if you have a relationship with this person, and whether you want to just let them in or you want to make sure you charge them right then and there. And let's say we do have someone that So I need to fix the spots not updating. So the way the spots update is after you pick someone, rather than if you change it, which it should be. So I'll just refresh the page, which also clears the spots. So let's say I have someone I see, enter them, I can't find them, I don't have a prior relationship with them, so I really want to make sure that they get charged that day. So what I can do is just enter the rental amount to create an invoice for them, and then I can take that payment later on, whether it be in a couple of hours, later in the afternoon, or at the end of the day. That way everything is formalized, you're not relying on, you can reserve their spot, and you're not relying on handwritten notes that only certain people can see. I can do this. Everybody that has access to the application can automatically see that person is allowed to be there, that they still owe, and how much they owe. And that's known instantly. This is, if you weren't to do that process, it's impossible for everyone to know who's supposed to be there, who's not, who still owes, and who doesn't, which is particularly difficult when you're doing one-time reservations with people that you don't have an existing relationship with. Because if you don't charge them that day, you may never charge them. So the next thing I want to do is that's all I'll show in this video, because the other features I need to obfuscate the data, so I'm not showing all the private information. But with just the receipts page and the map page, you can run most of the business from the invoicing and payments standpoint. Actually, so one last thing we can look at is the automatic invoice generation. Let me go to vendors. If I do create monthly invoices, okay, so I don't want to do that because that'll create it for next month, and it'll look like nobody has paid yet, so we're not going to do that right now. So one last thing that's actually important. Now let's say I'm no longer doing business with this person. They've contacted me and said they don't want the spot anymore. I've removed the spot. Rental amount, doesn't matter what you do, but you can just clear it out and say no longer here, and make sure to update the payment frequency back to blank so that it doesn't create invoices anymore. So let's say I'm actually just going to leave the amount they used to pay in case if I want to go back and look at what that spot used to be rented for. Used to rent spot S -29. So now when payment frequency is blank, they are going to be excluded from the automatic invoice generation. Now, the other way to exclude them from the invoice, automatic invoice generation, is from QuickBooks. From QuickBooks, if I were to go and make them inactive, they are no longer going to be automatically invoiced, and they're going to be hidden from the search, the balances, the vendors page, but they will not be removed from the map. That is a recent change I just made because there's too much disconnect between someone going in and marking somebody inactive in QuickBooks and not updating the map. So let me show what I mean by that. So I'm gonna put myself back in S29 and say they're no longer here. I remove the payment frequency so they're not getting invoices generated. I put a note that they're not here, and then I go into QuickBooks and then I mark them inactive. Now, even if I had an offboarding policy process, I can't prevent people from inactivating customers in QuickBooks. If I could, then I would have an offboarding process, completely restrict access to who can inactivate people in QuickBooks. From here, say, are you sure you want to inactivate them? Are you sure you want to remove them from this spot? And formalize it and say, are you sure you want to clear out any balances that they have? I can't enforce that. So our offboarding process is marking people inactive in QuickBooks. Now let's see what it would look like after we have an inactive customer who's a former vendor. So first thing you're going to see is the spot is still reserved, but it says deleted. So that's going to tell me in case if so what happens a lot of times is in QuickBooks you have duplicates, and QuickBooks Online's process to merge, I'll demonstrate how it works, is not simple. So you end up with a lot of duplicates. So now let's say this customer was inactivated in QuickBooks, but me just viewing that map, I don't know if they're truly no longer here, if they've been merged, or there was a duplicate, or what happened. Or maybe they got that spot is still used, but it was purchased by another person or a business that was transferred, and maybe somebody's still actually in that spot. So it's marked in red, so you can see that something's off with this spot, and then it's highlighted with deleted. And then if I know for certain this person is no longer here, I need to go into the map and remove them here. And that is the offboarding process right now. To set them inactive in QuickBooks, go to the map, make sure they're not there, go on their vendors page, and remove any spots they have, and also set their payment. Well, once you've inactivated them in QuickBooks, it doesn't matter what their payment frequency is. But you can also offboard people just by setting their payment frequency to none and clearing the spots. But if you do that, they'll still show up in the search, your balance, and your vendors page. So now that I'm inactive, I will not, well, okay, so this is actually cached because that's not my name anymore. So this here that you see is a feature of the browser caching these results. And actually actually, if I enter just T, you can see everything below this line is cached. So I'm not showing up before, so that means I'm deleted, and that's just a feature of this thing I'm using. The data list. But you can see I no longer show up in the top results because I'm removed, and I'm also going to be removed from the balances and the vendors page, and that's your process to keep everything clean, because if you're renting to a lot of people for just one time, you want to inactivate them to clear everything up. And the last thing I will show is how to merge records. So now let's say I have my main company, TG Test Company, and this one has a history with invoices and payments. But now, when I come 1 month, someone doesn't recognize me, and they enter, I don't know, let's say they enter Tim Gonzalez. Say they entered Tim Gonzalez because they didn't look and see the search that Timothy Gonzalez came up while they were typing. So now I don't have a payment history, so I'm going to add the rental amount and the payment amount because this looks like a new vendor. Also, I forgot to mention, this will create a new customer in QuickBooks if you don't find a match in the search. So now if I go, now I have Tim Gonzalez and I also have Timothy Gonzalez, and they're the same person, and I want to merge them. So what you're going to do is open up both records. And let's just say this invoice was from the duplicate customer. That way when it gets merged, we can identify it. So now we go to the original company. So the company that you want to keep, which is usually the original company with the most history, you take that display name of the customer you want to keep and you copy over the display name of the customer that you want to absorb and merge into, well, and have merged into the original company. When I click save, it'll say the name is already in use. Would you like to merge the two? And that will do a hard, well, it will delete them and move over all of their history. So we can see the invoice, this invoice was from the duplicate customer, all their history gets merged over. Now, does this actually do a hard delete and remove that customer? No. So you actually, Mm. The thing is, I don't think you can actually ever delete anyone, which can sometimes be annoying. I think you can only inactivate them, but um, okay, so it still doesn't even actually delete them, but they are in a weird state because they're not active, but they're also not inactive, so they don't show up in any search. Even if I include inactive, so I'm still not, so I guess it just puts the words deleted. As you can see, the merge process is very bad, so you end up with a lot of duplicates no matter what you do. But you can at least merge the history when you do find a duplicate, and that will avoid a lot of issues with things like reserved spots on the map. Now, one last feature I will show is you have the ability to create cards so that you can identify people. So it may be difficult to identify the business entity with a person. Um, the the business may be identified as the employee identifying themselves. It could be identify the owner. You could have multiple owners, or it could be identified as the actual business name. So what the cards allow you to do is create a definite way to identify a person to their account. Um, Now this QR code, now under the receipts page, you see vendor scan. You pick your camera. Um, yeah, you pick your camera and you would scan the QR code. I don't have one, so I can't demonstrate it, but that's what the cards allow you to do. Especially important if potentially you are working in multiple languages. That adds another level of complexity in addition to the various ways you can identify someone. And then in addition to that, knowing who to charge with your owner and employee cards. You know, if someone's an employee, they're supposed to be there where they're supposed to be, and not to charge them. If they're the owner, you know, also you should be asking for them to pay, and it just removes the complexity of identification altogether with these cards. And then one last thing I will mention is the way the system is meant to be used is at the end of the day, week, or month, someone is supposed to run a report for their cash basis income report. I do not like QuickBooks' cash basis income reports, if you deal with a lot of transactions, you will find that the reports are just wrong. So I have built my own cash basis income reports that goes on actual timestamps of when income is taken in and does away with all the complexities in QuickBooks. For potential issues. So if you remember, for here you have your essentially your true payment date. So the way the report's going to work is this payment has a timestamp. The cash basis income report is going to use that timestamp. That's a true cash basis income report. It cannot be falsified. That is why you never delete and recreate a payment. If you ever have to modify a payment, you go and you update the original payment. My cash basis income report runs off of the create date timestamps on the payments. It cannot be falsified. It's extremely accurate and it's extremely simple. In addition to that, it's going to break down the amounts that were paid by credit card, associate the payments to Clover, where the payment was made through the Primordial software application here, and then also group all credit card payments that we don't have transaction for here. Summarize what all of those payments are, and then everything not including that is, so you have the total amount of payments minus the credit card are going to be your cash and check payments. So what the report, I'll show what it looks like but not run it. So you have your start date, end date. That's going to be typically a day, a week, or a month. You run it, you're going to see your customer, the date the payment was collected, the amount the payment was collected. Now found in point of sale, that means, was it done from this page, or did someone just decide to go and create invoices and payments in QuickBooks on the fly, which you definitely don't want to do, because for one, you're losing an immutable record. So when you do a receipt here, you have an immutable record that cannot be changed in a separate system of what sale was performed. Anything I go and just create in QuickBooks, I can change it however I want to. So that's very bad to ever allow that to happen. You never want to allow people to go and create things directly in QuickBooks, because then that means they can change them directly in QuickBooks, and it's going to be very difficult to identify. So the second thing that you have is found in QuickBooks. So in addition to, let's say potentially somebody could go create a payment in QuickBooks for $100, charge someone $100, and I go back and I change it to $50, and the other $50 goes missing. But everything looks okay in QuickBooks because the invoice says it's only $50. Without going through each individual invoice, you would never know in that scenario that the invoice was ever changed, and you would have a person who had their receipt of the actual amount, and it's would be very difficult to reconcile that paper receipt that you gave out with the actual receipt you have if you're just going by paper receipts and they're not emailed or have some history behind them, and even if you did, how would you ever reconcile them? So you really need a separate immutable record, which is the point of sale system. And that goes both ways. So also, if I create it in a point of sale system, I also need to know that that record is in QuickBooks. Otherwise, I can take their payment, I can give them a receipt, and then I can go in QuickBooks and then just delete the payment, and then the actual cash goes missing. It's never going to show up in any report, and the balances are going to all look correct. So it's a two-part system to see that nothing can ever just automatically go missing and be removed. You always have your payment, then you have that can't be changed, then you have your record. Now, if someone does want to go and modify it in QuickBooks for a mistake, they're free to do that, but that will be highlighted here in this report by not being found in QuickBooks, and at the end of the month I can quickly go through and look at every discrepancy that there is and say, was this just deleted or was it modified? And you can very easily quickly tell that most of the time it's a duplicate, so you're going to delete a record. You can say, okay, this person paid twice. But now if it were deleted entirely, that's where you would start to want to look closer, and what this does is allow you to quickly identify what you need to look at more to make sure that all your income is accounted for. Now finally, we have found in Clover. What that does is to make sure that this system here is always working correctly. So if I take a credit card payment, how do I know that that payment actually went through successfully? Now you will be notified if any issue happens here, if the card is declined, if the information isn't correct, you'll be notified here and the sale is not going to go through. But let's say, how do I know that is actually occurring? So what this does is go and look at the recorded transaction IDs for the credit cards, and it's going to go query Clover and say, did that actually succeed in Clover? And you'll know right away to make sure that you aren't losing any potential income from credit cards. And the amount you charge in credit cards on this application, you can verify by the hour if you wanted to after each payment at the end of the week or month that you are in fact getting those payments in your merchant account. So this page here is really designed for the owner to check everything that was done for the month very quickly. And it doesn't show it here, and I'm not going to run it, but at the bottom you'll see total credit card payment, total cash payment, and total amount collected. And those amounts are expected to line up with the income you deposit into your bank account after expenses, plus what's in your merchant account. And that will very easily tell you that there is no missing income. And just one final thing, one thing I never got to add is for all these payments can be broken down by the user that took the payment that was logged in. I've never had a need for that, but if there were discrepancies, you can go and see every transaction, who it was made from, where it was made from, if you did want to know it on an individual user basis. But right now I've never had a need to see that. And the reason I mention that is because it is saved as a note in QuickBooks, but all of that can be modified. But the original information is saved in the point of sale record, which cannot be changed without system level access. And with good separation of responsibilities, you wouldn't have someone taking payments that has access to that, and you would then have a very secure process.